Edinburgh Climbing Centre, where the leader of the SNP, Nicola Sturgeon, is taking questions at her manifesto launch.
I take a very different view of that. I'm not seeking to impose policies on anybody. I'm seeking for support in Scotland for the manifesto that I am publishing today, and I'm saying very clearly that I want to seek to build common cause and to forge alliances with people of like mind across the UK so that we can win more progressive change. As you know, James, fought the referendum campaign last year with all my heart and soul. I campaigned hard for a yes vote. During that campaign, politicians from Westminster came to Scotland, as it was entirely their right to do, and urged Scotland, and I think this is a direct quote, not to leave the UK, but to lead the UK. Now, Scotland did not vote in the referendum to become independent. We remain part of the Westminster system, and therefore I think it is entirely legitimate, and I think it is important for Scotland that we seek to make our voice heard in that system and to encourage and to use our influence to encourage the Westminster system to take better decisions. Because as long as we remain a part of it, it matters to people in Scotland that the decisions made at Westminster are good decisions. And that's why I say to people watching in other parts of the UK that it is in the interests of the SNP speaking up for Scotland to work constructively in that system to make it better. And I happen to think as we do that, we can get better politics and better policies for people right across the UK who are as desperate for change as people in Scotland are right now. James Matthews from Sky.
First Minister, you're a party that supports Scottish independence. You are talking about cooperation with MPs in the north of England and in Wales. Not content with breaking Scotland out of the UK, are you now penciling political fault lines elsewhere around the UK? And second of all, can I ask your reaction to what Boris Johnson has had to say this morning? That giving the SNP power in a Westminster government would be like putting King Herod in charge of a baby farm.
Okay, I did say you might not like some of the questions, and that is not the fault of Mr Matthews from Sky. Can I say in response to that, first of all, I haven't heard the comments of Boris Johnson directly this morning, so it's perhaps not entirely fair of me to comment on them. But if he did say that, then that's an entirely offensive comment, and I think it will be treated as such, not just by people in Scotland, but people across the UK, who in my experience of ordinary people, the length and breadth of the UK, do not see Scotland in that way at all, and do not even see the SNP in that way at all. In terms of the first part, of your question, the short answer is no. I'm not seeking in this election to create division with or between anybody. I make no secret of the fact that I want Scotland to be an independent country, but I'm a Democrat. Scotland did not vote to be independent last year, and if Scotland is ever to become independent, then a majority of people in Scotland need to vote for that in a referendum. Right now, we remain part of the UK. We remain part of the Westminster system, and therefore my interest is in seeking to build alliances across the UK for better politics and for better policies, because that will help people in Scotland. And as a politician, I have spent my entire political career arguing for what I consider to be in the best interests of Scotland. People will not always agree that what I argue for is in the best interests of Scotland, but that is entirely my motivation. So in this election, I am offering to people elsewhere in the UK a genuine hand of friendship. I'm not trying to hide my political beliefs as far as independence is concerned, but I am saying very clearly we can work together to get the change that people in Scotland want and in my experience, many people across the rest of these islands want as well. I accept the responsibility to be the one to persuade people in other parts of the UK that my entreaties in that regard are genuine, and I take that responsibility seriously. It matters to Scotland to get better policies at Westminster, and if we can use our voice to do that, we benefit people not just in Scotland, but everywhere across these islands as well. And I'll go next to Brian Taylor from BBC Scotland.
First Minister, thanks very much indeed. The point you made there about cooperating, taking that point. David Cameron, nonetheless, is saying it would be a frightening prospect if your party has influence on the governance of the UK. If we take that to its ultimate logic, is it possible, is it feasible, is it even desirable in your view that Scottish independence might come about through the back door of English disquiet rather than the front door of Scottish determination?
Okay, I was actually in the wings of a television studio watching as David Cameron made those comments in the BBC in London yesterday. I'm told, although I'm not sure if it's true, but I am told that he was not keen to sit next to me on the sofa of the BBC while he made the comments. I'll leave him to confirm or deny if that was the case. Yeah, I go back to what I said earlier on. David Cameron was one of those politicians who entirely legitimately sought to persuade and ultimately successfully persuaded people in Scotland to vote against independence on the basis that Scotland's voice could and would be heard within the Westminster system. If Scotland chooses now, as it is democratically entitled to do, to make its voice heard by voting SNP, then it is completely outrageous and unacceptable for any Westminster politician to say to Scotland that that's not acceptable. It's tantamount to saying your voice will be heard as long as you vote the way we want you to vote, and that's not democratic. And secondly, lastly, on the point about independence, let me make crystal clear there is no back door to Scottish independence. There is only the route of persuading a majority of people to vote for independence in a referendum. There is no back door, there is no shortcut, there is no easy route. And I take this responsibility very seriously. I will spend every day that I am privileged to hold the office that I hold in seeking to persuade people in other parts of the UK that, notwithstanding that they might disagree with the SNP on the question of independence, that we can nevertheless be allies for progressive change. That's what I have sought to do in this campaign so far. It is what I will seek to do for every remaining day of this campaign, and it's how SNP MPs will conduct themselves in the House of Commons for each and every day that they're given the privilege of serving there. Claire Stewart, STV.
Nicola, full fiscal responsibility, as it's now called, made it onto the second last page of the manifesto, but it is in there, so will you now give us full costings? And will you also detail where money is coming from for pledges like £9.5 billion for the NHS?
Okay. In terms of full financial responsibility, first of all, I said in my opening remarks that is something that we will seek agreement on. Full fiscal and financial responsibility is, of course, about giving the Scottish Parliament the powers to grow our economy, the powers to create revenues, get more people into jobs so that they're paying taxes and our revenues are growing. Even if we reach an agreement on full fiscal responsibility, we know from the experience of the Calman Commission it will take several years for that to be fully implemented, and that is the reality we know from experience. It's therefore irrelevant to use, as the opposition do, a figure from now. It's no more relevant than it would be if I picked a figure from one of the 7 out of the last 10 years when Scotland's been in a stronger fiscal position than the rest of the UK. Our fiscal position when Scotland becomes fiscally and financially responsible, autonomous, will depend on our economic growth between now and then. It will depend on the detail of the fiscal framework that is agreed, and in that SNP MPs will have a critical part to play in getting the best deal for Scotland. And as part of that transition, what I want to do is win as many powers in the key areas for Scotland as possible. Powers over employment, the minimum wage, business taxes, to get more people into jobs and to grow our economy. Because the only alternative to that, and why Labour in particular, I think, wants to spend so much time talking about this, the only alternative to that is the cuts that Labour and the Tories are proposing. If we want a genuine long-term alternative to austerity, then the more powers we have in our own hands to grow our economy and make a better future for this country, the better. In terms of the second part of your question, Claire, we set out in this manifesto an alternative approach to public finances. We reject the continued cuts of Labour and the Tories, and we say that we want to see modest spending increases over the life of the next Parliament, in each year of the next Parliament. We will still, under that plan, see the debt and the deficit fall in each year as a share of our national income, but we will, and we are saying this very openly, under that plan we would take longer to completely eliminate the deficit. And what that does is make available an additional £140 billion to invest in things like our NHS, in economic growth, in lifting people out of poverty. We're also setting out in the manifesto revenue-raising measures that we would support. I mentioned in my opening remarks the top rate of tax going back to 50p, support for a mansion tax, support for a banker's bonus tax. So these are the ways in which we will fund all of the commitments in this manifesto, and all of the commitments, spending commitments we make in this manifesto that we would vote for and push for at Westminster are affordable within that framework that we're setting out. We, of course, also say where we would spend money differently, and I use again the example of Trident. That's a very, very real way in which we can free up resources to spend on giving our children a better future. So this is a fiscally responsible manifesto, but it's one that also says we need to reduce the deficit in a way that does not tear up the fabric of our society, and I am proud to stand on that premise. Martin Geisler, ITN.
First Minister, you said today that those with the broadest shoulders should pay a little bit more, but you haven't used the opportunity to raise tax in 8 years in government here. In fact, can you remind us of a single meaningful redistributive policy you have implemented, taking middle-class money and giving it to the less well-off?
Well, in terms of the tax-raising powers, we don't have the power to raise tax on those with the broadest shoulders. At the moment, all we can do is raise the basic rate. All we can do right now is raise or lower the basic rate of income tax by 3p. And I wouldn't describe those paying the basic rate of income tax as those with the broadest shoulders. Now, the Scottish Parliament will be... The Scottish Parliament will, of course, be getting additional tax varying powers starting in 2016, and we hope more to come after that. And we will consider, in the normal course of setting our budgets, the Finance Secretary is here today listening very carefully, we will consider how we use those tax varying powers that the Scottish Parliament has to meet the objectives that I'm setting out in this manifesto. In terms of the policies we have pursued, progressive policies to help those most in need of help. There are many that I can cite. We've, for example, taken action to ensure that council tax benefit is not taken away from the poorest people in our society. We're investing every year right now more than £100 million in mitigating the impact of Tory welfare cuts, including taking away entirely the impact of the bedroom tax. The council tax freeze proportionately helps those at the bottom more than it does those at the top. Unlike governments south of the border, we have retained educational maintenance allowances allowing those from most deprived communities the opportunity to stay in and further their education. We have been and we will continue to be a progressive Scottish Government, and we will also argue for and vote for progressive policies in Westminster as well.